Well, welcome everybody. I see it's 10:30. I'm going to get started. Thank you for coming. My name is Tim Coonan. I'm with the Dentons, Davis Brown Law Firm. Along with my partner, Sydney Gangstad, are the lobbying shop at the Dentons, Davis Brown Firm. We represent clients across the spectrum of industries, and proud to be a sponsor here today. And the name of this is a political forecast that's as good as a weather forecast. So we're going to have fun with it today. Things change tomorrow, they change tomorrow. But I think it's a fun topic. I think in this day and age in particular, it's ever changing and something to pay attention to. Bill Hannigan is also a participant here. He's been at the Land Expo for the last 15 years. He's not feeling well, not COVID, and I know you got to do that. But he sends his regrets and wishes he was here. There's our agenda for today, the year in review, our public policy. There's going to be just a brief advertisement for Dentons Davis Brown. I hope you bear with me because Davis Brown has recently combined with the Dentons Law Firm, which is an international law firm. So we have offices all over the world now. A little different, high potential, but definitely worth spending a few minutes on. And then the meat of the presentation. So year in review. It's been a heck of a year. Just peruse these small events that have taken place over the last year. I mean, I don't think we even cover murder hornets or any other sort of weird derecho. I guess that'd be an extreme weather event. But it has been, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? It has been a year. It has been a couple years. It has been, in politics, I'd say, it's a reordering of the universe with party affiliation, with presidential candidates, with the topics, the issues. Some people call it the January 6th insurrection. Other people refer to it as something totally different. No one can agree, even on terms. And that's sort of my position. I think it's fast-moving times, but here's what we don't have. We, lobbyists, professionals, people in every industry who are charged with keeping things going, don't have the luxury to buy into the insanity or to buy into the extreme events that are taking place. We still have jobs to do, and the job in the public policy arena is to continue to provide good advocacy for our clients. The job in the ag community is to continue to feed and fuel the world, and regardless of what's happening. And to this point, it looks like everybody is being successful in that respect. So this is our little brief advertisement. We are in Washington, D.C. with a very large office on all the continents. If you have business in any country in the world, there's a good chance we have an ability to do it with you. Dentons nationally attracts a lot of really high-profile, talented folks from the legal and political worlds, also from different disciplines, and are able to do whatever. There's our government affairs. And as any of you who are in any way involved in government affairs, who in here has hired a lobbyist before? There's one, there's two. Hard to manage, right? But fun, Who here is part of a trade association that has a lobbyist? Right. So lots of people actually have a contact with the public policy arena through some affiliation, or if you've directly hired one before, it's good to have a chip in the game, and that's really what it comes down to. These are our locations now in the U.S. We have 44 different locations throughout the U.S., and that's expanding from a government relations perspective. We have a Dentons U.S. in every state, so I think that's pretty broad. And then these are our global numbers, which I still am having a hard time getting my arms around, but 82 different countries, 207 locations. So this is a firm that has been in Des Moines for 75 or 80 years, the Davis Brown Law Firm, that is now the Dentons Davis Brown Law Firm, and plugged into this network globally. All right, I think I've done enough on Dentons. On the federal side, there have been a lot of changes on the federal side, and it continues to change, even though it looks like gridlock. It is gridlock in the Senate and the House. We've watched this play out. They went home for Christmas not having done Build Back Better. They went home for Christmas without doing a budget. So they're doing a continuing resolution, which is really driving the whole policy discussion. And what has been laid bare is just how powerful one senator can be, right? Senator Joe Manchin has definitely asserted his individual rights as a senator. This year, I think we're going to see the attempt to erode those rules. They aren't laws that allow senators to act like that. Those are just chamber rules that they've respected over the last couple hundred years. So in this space, these are the high-level issues that are being dealt with, and the privacy and data security and the antitrust issues should specifically interest you, because the government is always trying to figure out how to manage businesses, right? Businesses are always trying to figure out how to not be managed by government, and that's the tension. And right now, we have an administration that is starting to look into potentially treating privately held companies like publicly traded companies. And that's something that we need to pay attention to. They'd be doing large privately held companies, but for a long time, a decision tree for a large company would be to, should we go public or stay private? Here are all the benefits of being private. Here are all the benefits of being public. That might be one of the most fundamental decisions a large business makes. Our government's actively considering whether to make those two look a lot more alike. And on the privacy and data security, you watched in the 2020 election really this come to the forefront, where the question now becomes Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, do they own the public square, or are they the public square? And if a public square is to be thought of a small town with the courthouse in the middle, and anyone can go and throw up a sign and protest or talk or hand out pamphlets, that's a public square that nobody owns. But if the place where everybody's communicating is owned by a private company, what's their right as a private company? Is it their information? Is it their data because you're using their platform? Or has it become so public that it's something completely different? That is something we're going to be looking at. And on the data security side, I don't think I need to belabor that point. We are under attack every single day. We have all kinds of patches and technology and thousands of people charged with keeping our companies and governments safe from cyber attacks. The problem is, because of the gridlock at the federal level, which is probably where the decisions are best made, you're starting to see companies and entities go to the states where things move faster. And we'll talk about the Iowa legislature later, but things move faster at the state level. You have a lot more chance for progress. The problem is you end up with a patchwork of regulations and laws governing something that's truly global. The one thing that was not gridlocked, and fortunately for us is almost never gridlocked, Congress did pass the National Defense Authorization Act. That matters for a lot of reasons, not just because we like to have our military funded, which is pretty important in a lot of ways. All the downstream economic impact of that, the contractors, the subcontractors, the employers, there's a whole, it's a giant, as you know, giant industry that actually made it through. We also have made major strides in the rural broadband. I like when someone walks in and does this. That's Matt Connolly, ladies and gentlemen. On the financial services and tax side, again, these are some issues I think we hear a lot about. What has been interesting, I think, on this list, first of all, that Build Back Better Act that is being really, really pushed by the Democrats in the Senate and the House has a tremendous amount of provisions in there that I think cause people a lot of pause. In addition to the cost, there are some other tax changes that would dramatically impact businesses, and some good, some bad, but it's a hard sell right now, given one, the inflation. You say that word, that pulls off the charts, and as we head into this next election, obviously that colors everything. Right or wrong, the Republicans have made the case that inflation equals no Build Back Better. And the Democrats are trying to make the case that Build Back Better will improve inflation. Just feel like I should acknowledge Ambassador Branstad here. Thank you for coming. Now I'm really got to stay honest. This is going to be, talk about having a professor show up for your class. I might just sub out the Chinese delisting issue to Governor Branstad. Cryptocurrency issues. That is, everybody's asking, is this real? Is this forever? Is this something we need to get involved with? Meanwhile, you see these anecdotal stories of people making billions and losing billions. You have an NFL athlete who's maybe I think a second string defensive back who asked to be paid in cryptocurrency, and that year he became the highest paid NFL player in history. This kind of volatility is really hard. Talk about no way to forecast, right? But the U.S. government is actively trying to figure out how to take a position and probably end up having its own cryptocurrency. I think once the governments dial in the role of cryptocurrency, then you'll start seeing maybe some more predictability in that. But for now, it's a wild west. And as usual, regulations and law are light years behind the market. That's just, the arc of government is so much slower than the arc of the market. And our government has a history of playing catch up with what trends are. People see far into the future beyond what governments can see. And it's just how they're structured. What has another, I guess when we're talking about gridlock, something that has starting to have some coalescence in Congress is the view that China is now the top threat to our security, our national security and economic security. A recent poll came out, overwhelmingly Americans switched. For years it was Russia, for years, even after the Cold War. Just recently that has flipped, and now Democrats and Republicans and independents overwhelmingly view China as the top threat from a national security perspective and economic security perspective. And so obviously members of Congress in both parties are responding to that. They're seeing the same things. I'm sure they are privy to briefings that would keep us up at night. But one of the things that's been working on is delisting Chinese companies from being able to do business with. And I don't even know if I could do this justice, but Ambassador Branstad has played a major role in this for a long time and will continue to, I think, as we relate to China. And then I'm not going to go through the details of the others, but these are the things that are causing us a lot of pause at the federal level. Infrastructure. Everyone's talking about infrastructure, state and federal levels, right? We've had an immense amount of money pumped into our economy so that we don't know whether our economy is good because we're good or it's good because there's so much money awash through the system. The state of Iowa has a surplus that's unrelated to the federal largesse. The state of Iowa has saved its own money and received federal money. So the governor is able to give out money autonomously that is separate from our general fund. That's not the case in most states, but this is the funding they're proposing, and you'll see the production tax credit and the investment tax credit is in the Build Back Better, also the clean fuels tax incentives, RFS, and then you see on the executive side, we're having a hard time on the RFS side, and that's no surprise given the disposition of this administration. It just is. It's something that, fortunately, I think Tom Vilsack has an understanding of the impact it has on Iowa. I think that's a good thing that he's in the administration, but we're obviously playing catch up. But here are the big winners. Interestingly enough, legacy transportation. So trains, rail is a big winner in the Build Back Better. Really, these are, you're looking at organizations that have a heavy labor union, heavy government presence that would be the big winners. And then on the other side, the electric vehicles. And then the big losers, which I think surprises people, because I think the market is really embracing drone technology and the advanced air mobility. I think you've got the market and the government, that proposal are sort of at odds a little bit. And then I think going forward for the rest of this year, you can expect audit investigations throughout. I think if Congress's control flips to the Republicans, which people are prognosticating that is what's going to happen in this next election cycle, you'll see it, but you'll see audits and investigations going a different way. Just a brief Supreme Court update. they've got some stuff to do this year, and one of the and if you look through this, and we'll talk about the impact on the states, but our legislature just came into session yesterday, and these questions that the Supreme Court are dealing with is exactly what the legislators are either waiting to work on or have legislation ready based on court cases that have happened since the last legislative session or since legislation has passed. So I'm not going to belabor the point about abortion, but that'll drive a lot of debate at the state capitol this year. That's really where, when you're in lobbying and public policy and you're not directly on an issue, like I don't have a client on abortion, but those issues you have to pay attention to because it's all part of the whole, and it really issues like that really harden people, and it's a real dividing line. And when that happens, you can only have so many of those issues in the legislature before it starts really breaking down. We're awaiting that decision. We're awaiting the COVID-19 decision. The circuits are split. There are some circuits that have said government cannot mandate vaccinations, employers to mandate vaccinations. Some circuits have said they have. It's an ideal place for the Supreme Court to weigh in. We in Iowa, during a special session in November, passed legislation signed by the governor, not disallowing vaccine mandates, but strongly restricting companies in the way they implement them. And there is a push now to dial that down even more and get a full vaccine mandate restriction, so companies would not be allowed to mandate vaccines or even ask you if you are vaccinated. Huge rally at the Capitol yesterday. A much larger rally will be Wednesday of anti-vaccination rally. As Governor Branstad could tell you, there's always rallies at the beginning of the year. It's usually the environmental groups. Now it's environmental groups and the anti-vaccination groups. And they come in the thousands. If anyone thinks that they're some kind of small, plucky little outlier, they are not. It cuts across a lot of different socioeconomic strata. It is not who you think it is. It's families. It is also who you think it is, but it is families. To underestimate them would be a bad idea. You have legislators who you would otherwise think are sort of middle of the road, not into issues like that, care. So I think that's something we're going to see. The January 6th investigation doesn't seem to be hitting in red states. It's something I think that it needs to be investigated. Obviously, it was a very big deal, but it is extremely political, extremely polarized. And I sense that if the Democrats see this not really getting a lot of airplay, that it might just close up and we put a bow on and go away. And then the Chevron case, which is something that I'm actually not very familiar with. That's something I don't even feel comfortable covering. But Justice Breyer is going to retire. So we have a Supreme Court that's been heavily appointed by Republicans, particularly President Trump, had more than his fair share of appointments. This could be a chance for President Biden to have an appointment. All right, now some fun stuff. The redistricting maps. Everyone paying attention to redistricting? For political science dorks, this is the biggest, this is Super Bowl, right? Because this is how they allocate power. In Iowa, we do it better than anybody, without question. And I think you could hear people outside of the state say it, political scientists say it, professors say it, because a computer generates these maps based on population. And it's that cut and dry. The legislature gets a couple of bites at the apple. So the census gets delivered, census data gets delivered, usually in December to January of the prior year, and by April of this year, these lines should have been set. This year, the Census Bureau, for whatever reason, didn't get us the numbers till late August, early September, which meant the legislature had to go into special session in order to approve these maps. They approved both the congressional and the state district maps. They take the census, they see where the people live, they reorganize it, and then they propose it to the legislature. Legislature says, yeah, I like that, or I don't. In this case, they said they didn't like the first one, which is not uncommon. It's as common as not for the legislature to take the first map. So all the talk you heard about how politicized the process was, it went exactly how it was designed. The only difference, caveat I'd say, is it was designed exactly for this situation because the Supreme Court is technically oversees this process if it gets past September 15th, if they haven't decided on a map, because the contemplation was if they couldn't figure it out in session and they couldn't get it done by September 15th, the Supreme Court would step in and just take the census data and do their own map. The Supreme Court, I believe, wisely said, we will be responsible for this process, but we're delegating it back to you because this is necessarily a legislative function. And so they gave the legislature till December 1st of this year to figure it out, or they would take it back over. So that is the old districts there. Let me see here. This is the new district. So just going to, real quick, the 4th congressional district is always giant because the Northwest Iowa is the least populated part of the state. Now, you see the districts have to go typically by county line. That's one of the computer guided. It's by county line, it's by population. It has to be compact. There are all kinds of factors that go into making these districts. But what you now have is not something terribly different, except that 1 and 2 flip, right? And you now have the 3rd congressional district losing Pottawatomie County. That's a really important thing for the Democrat running in the 3rd congressional district because Representative Axney, who has won the last couple of years, won on the strength of turnout in Pottawatomie County and Polk County and Dallas County, and not by terribly much. And so losing Pottawatomie County is a big deal for her and needs to be something. She needs to make up that vote somewhere else. And in a year like this where it's looking potentially to be a red wave, that's a tough district to hold on to. In the 1st congressional district, you'll get Congresswoman Mariannette Miller Meeks is running, and she, you might recall, won by 6 votes, the closest recount ever in American history. This district is better for her, and the chances of her holding that are pretty good. The 2nd congressional district, Ashley Hinson's running there. They moved. She had to move a little bit. They flipped. She's a former newscaster, former legislator, state legislator, freshman. And then 4th congressional district is Congressman Feenstra running virtually unopposed. I don't know if there's an announced opponent. In the 3rd congressional district, there are a couple of announced opponents. One is the state senator Zach Nunn from Altoona, and he is planning, and he's very aggressively running. So that is our congressional makeup. I think chances are okay for a Republican pickup. I think chances are good for holds in 1, 2, and 4. And that is partially due to the fact that given Iowa is now a +8 Trump state, or as of 2020, a +8 Trump state, the national Democratic apparatus might not view this as the best investment as they're trying to hold seats. They're playing a large, a national game. And so if those numbers remain the same, it's likely that, that's what will happen here. There's Ashley Hinson. There's Mariannette Miller Meeks. And I would also say, with the exception of Cindy Axney, and of course, how could I forget? Senator I should mention him. I shouldn't just treat this like it's happening, but Senator Grassley's running. He's got a primary opponent, a sitting state senator from the western side of the state, but Senator Grassley recently received the endorsement of former President Trump. He is also obviously widely popular. His name ID may exceed Governor Branstad's. I don't know if it exceeds it, but it's up there. And he's won more elections. I mean, he's been in office since 1959, I think, 1957, 1959. But I think what you should note about all of them, except for Cindy Axney, is they all were one-time state legislators. And I think people overlook the state legislature sometimes. And I think some people don't even know when the legislature's in session. Those state legislators go somewhere. At one point, Governor Branstad was a state legislator. At one point, Governor Vilsack was a state senator. You go through our congressional delegation and our governors, and for the most part, they've all had some time in the legislature. And so as you're working with your organizations and thinking about public policy, remember the people you're advocating to, the people you're working with, end up going somewhere and continuing to do things beyond the state legislature. So the state redistricting maps. Okay, this is the reason we call it proposed plan 2 is just to remind you it did take the second map. This is the plan. And these are the open seats it creates. So from a political perspective, when you get a map, what math we're all doing is what are the open seats and now who has to run against each other? And then there's this great sorting, and usually it almost all sorts itself out. So you have Republicans running against Republicans and Democrats running against Democrats. A lot of times they figure out some will move to an open seat, some will retire, some run for different offices, some just make a decision to make sure that there isn't a Republican primary. And there aren't terribly many Republican primaries now after the map and then after the sorting that happened after the map. But the open seats are interesting that were created. With the exception of here, you're looking at open seats around the Des Moines metro area, a lot of open seats around the Des Moines metro area, around the population centers, some in the rural parts of the state. The most contested races this session, just like this election, like every election, are going to be the suburban seats. The Democrats were on a march before the last election in Iowa and around the country. Urban seats were almost starting to be, or suburban seats were almost starting to be ceded by Republicans to say, okay, now our constituency may be these towns like Oskaloosa and Fort Dodge and Ottumwa and also the rural parts of the state. And then there was a comeback. There was a comeback in the suburbs around Des Moines in particular, where seats that had almost been seated, these people, the right candidates showed up, they worked hard, they door knocked, they did all the right things. They didn't get terribly much financial support and they won. And so now the fronts are everywhere for the Democrats. You are looking at now an emptying out of the rural parts of the state for the Democratic Party, and they need to work to try to figure out how to get that back. In fact, the two open seats that were just filled, one a legislator passed away in the Ankeny area, was a Republican, and it was filled by a Republican. But one was a retirement in the Newton area, had been a long-held Democratic seat, was taken by the Republicans. And that might be the trend they're looking at around the state. So the Senate district, same thing, that doesn't really mean much. But again, the open seats it creates. You again look right around the Des Moines area, right? This is sort of nearly the golden circle as they like to refer to it, and then around this area and this area. These open seats are created because the population shifted. You can just track the population shift by the open seats that are created. In this case, it got very interesting, particularly in the Des Moines area, because the two Senate leaders are in the Des Moines area. You've got Senator Chapman in Waukee, and you've got Senator Whitver in Ankeny. Senator Whitver is moving to an open seat that kind of wraps around Des Moines. Senator Chapman's decided to take a stand in the seat that he is currently sitting in, and he is now thrown in with a sitting Democrat, Senator Sarah Trone Garriott, who just won election against a really popular mayor in Urbandale, Mayor Cirksena. So that'll be an interesting. That's probably the most interesting race to watch in the Senate right now, because that is a rapidly trending district. You have a state representative, Kenan Judge, who won Waukee with overwhelming numbers. He's a Democrat, was a lifelong Republican, switched parties, works his tail off, and has won, and people really like him. But you're also seeing a trend over there where it's not as conservative as you once thought it was. And so people like me are watching very closely the suburban parts of the state and all over the country, because that's where the margins will be. That being said, the chances of the Democrats retaking control of the House or the Senate would be predicated on some unforeseeable outcomes between now and the election. I can't imagine what would cause a flip there. It's 60-40. The Republicans control the chamber, 60-40 in the House. And the Republicans have 32 of the 50 seats in the Senate. People are talking about the Republicans possibly getting to 34, and in the House even higher than 60. Those are immense margins in the Iowa State House. And I mean Democrat or Republican. The Democrat high water mark in my career is 60. And that was 2006 or 2008. It's not common for one party to control the legislature for this long. The House Republicans have 12 years now. That's a long time in Iowa. The Senate Republicans are up on 6 years now, and most likely looking at another 8 to 10 years of single party control, and of both chambers single party control. So, you know, we're really watching for the margins, not really control. Some interesting details about the election maps. On the executive branch side, Governor Reynolds has really done a great job staffing herself and finding really talented people. She learned from somebody else how to do this. No, I'm just kidding. Craig Paulson is now that he's former Speaker of the House. He's now the Director of the Department of Management and the Department of Revenue. Liz Matney, it's important if you're in the Medicaid space. She's an extremely talented person. She used to be governor's staff, and now she's the director of the Medicaid enterprise. Taryn is a new chief operating officer for her. She's wonderful, and Stephanie is her new deputy chief of staff. Really, if you get the chance to work with the governor's office, it's a luxury because we get to work with such talented people. The governor still has the majority of the $1.2 billion in ARPA money to distribute. She's made some big announcements in workforce and in rural broadband, or housing and rural broadband, but I think we're going to see more of that. And also of note, Governor Reynolds is the vice chair of the Republican Governors Association. For those of you who don't pay attention to the Republican Governors Association and like politics, I would pay attention to them. The Republican Governors Association is an extremely influential group. These Republican governors get together, they collaborate, they talk, they fundraise together, they share resources, a lot of talent between, a lot of staff moves between governors that way. This is an organization that I would get interested in if you want to have a vision of what is happening in politics in the state and the country. The judicial branch, our judicial branch, we've got our own. They conducted the redistricting process. When the last Supreme Court Justice Apple is the last democratically appointed Supreme Court justice on the bench, and he is terming out here this year. This will be, once he does, the bench will be entirely appointed by Republican governors. That is solely a function of the fact that we've had this stretch of Republican control. The Supreme Court justices retire at a much faster clip at the Iowa level than they do at the national level. And so this will be an interesting era. I will say, though, that Supreme Court justice appointments are no guarantee of outcome. These governors pick the best people they can find. They're all very smart. They're all very accomplished. They're also very independent-minded, and they read the law and they interpret it. So I think we have an extremely smart, incisive bench. All right, looking ahead, these are some of the issues looking ahead that we're in this next legislative session. Tax reform is the top thing being discussed. There are people talking about eliminating the income tax entirely, and they're not kidding. And they have the money to do it. And so be watching for that. Be watching for that, and also if you like tax credits, make sure you make a good case for them, because this group of legislators is thinking we'd rather be a low tax credit state than a high tax credit state. And they've got economists' opinions that probably back that play. So if you are in a business that cares about tax credits, make sure you engage with your trade association. Make sure they are making the argument that it's a tax credit worth saving, because I think everything's on the list this year. The schools, I'm glad I'm not lobbying for the schools. And there's going to just be a lot tackled this year, if you can see that. So like I've been saying through this presentation, engage, join your trade association, activate, become a leader in your trade association. If you have a company and don't have a public policy communication strategy, I would get one. Big pieces are being moved around fast at the federal and state level. This is a rapidly changing environment. And then even if you don't feel like you have political need, I would encourage you to identify who your local elected officials are and go have coffee with them. Iowa is about the most open state when it comes to engaging with your elected officials. I swear to you, If you haven't done this, you should, if for nothing else, just to know, and then they view you as a stakeholder, and then you go to their events, and then all of a sudden when you come to the Capitol, you know somebody, and it's just not a bad thing to do, because you want to make a friend before you need one. And I will tell you that the hardest conversations you could ever have are, hi, my name is Tim Coonan. Can you help me with something? No, you want those to be two different conversations. And we'll end with a commercial. This is what we do in the government relations department. So, and happily. And these are the clients we represent at the Capitol right now. Kind of all over the place, but very pleased to be able to represent all of these organizations and companies that they entrust us with their public policy work. And that's what I got. I don't know if I left time for questions. I don't think so. But no one's dismissing us, so if anyone has any questions. Yes? Mm-hmm. So that's a really good point, and it's something that the legislature struggled with for a long time because property tax is assessed at the local level. And so it's hard to, whenever there's a law passed that impacts property tax, the local taxing authority has the ability to change how the property is assessed or the assessment of that property. And so if there's any relief that's given, it's made up for in the valuation. Okay, so last year, the legislature removed the mental health levy from your property taxes. So, that's how we paid for mental health. You had it on your property tax, and that's gone. And that was a way they felt like they could affirmatively take some property tax burden off. It's an ongoing local control issue. And I guarantee you they are thinking about it. But I think right now what they're trying to focus on is they're looking at the Iowans' total tax liability. And which of those pieces can they impact? They know they can impact income tax, and they can impact sales tax to a certain extent. But income tax is really where the state legislature has the state government has complete authority over. So I understand what you're saying, and trust me, they struggle with this every year. How do we keep property taxes in check? Because what I also think is really, I don't know if it's serendipitous, it's not, it's the opposite of serendipitous. Everyone gets their notices like a month into the legislative session. So you get your property tax notice of the increase like in February, right? When all the legislatures are back in session and all talking to each other. So then the constituents then send emails to their legislators and say, I just got my property tax bill, and they're all together. And it creates all that, that anger and what can we do? And then they find that it's hard to do much on the property tax side. Any other questions? Governor, how'd I do? Yes.
I'm trying to address that property tax issue, and I'll never forget when I came to the legislature and I was talking about wanting to reduce property tax, and Henry Nelson was a Winnebago County auditor, former Speaker of the House, and he pulled me aside at the auditor's office and he said, trying to compare income tax and sales tax with property tax is trying to compare a horse with two rabbits. and we've made progress over the years on that. The problem is, if you try to, a lot of people believe in local control. So, and so when we did property tax relief, like we took the entire cost of the court system off of property taxes. We did a lot of things. But the problem is, you've got to basically require them to eliminate the property tax levy, or put limitations on what they can do in other areas. Otherwise, that's the frustration for legislators.
Right.
you can affect the income tax. You can reduce the income tax, but you may think you've reduced the property tax, but the locals undo it.
Yeah.
And it depends upon the county.
Yes.
In conservative counties, they may well reduce it, but in liberal counties like Polk County, probably not.
Well, and you also have, you know, like in the cities, you've got cities like West Des Moines that are growing exponentially, and so their need to raise property tax really isn't there. They don't have a franchise. They don't, you know, they've been able to actually reduce property taxes because Jordan Creek, because of, you know, all the big, you know, commercial areas out there. Cities that are stagnating or shrinking in their revenue and in their population, they don't have a lot of tools in the toolbox, and so they, you know, the property taxes keep going up. You know, Des Moines is an interesting situation where I live in the city of Des Moines proper, where their property tax base is really not that big, and so they have to raise they feel they have to raise property taxes on those that are paying property tax, and so there's just a lot. It's hard to unwind, and I think that was good advice by by that auditor. Yes.
I was just going to expand on something that Ambassador Branstad said. I may have my facts not quite right, but I think there are states like Kansas that have provisions that if the tax goes up, you know, because of assessments going up, not just the rate, the total tax is going to go up, then they have to jump through an extra hoop. They have to have some kind of disclosure, then they have to have some extra hearings, or it has to pass by a supermajority of some kind. Again, I don't know exactly the mechanics of those proposals, but that's one thing that other states are doing to address that issue, to avoid the automatic increase that comes from assessment.
And it's interesting. I do know that there is behind the scenes work being done on a property tax transparency bill, where it sheds some light on the local taxing authorities and how they come to get to their decision to raise property taxes, and then also require a lot more notice and hearings and public input. And I think that if that comes and becomes prime time, I think that's something that'll be, I would have to believe that's a nonpartisan issue, I hope. But they're going to be trying to chip away at that through that process. But you're right, it's different states deal with it differently. Iowa has a pretty strong local control law, and there have been many, many lawsuits on many fronts trying to figure out the balance between what is the purview of the state and what is the purview of the local. And property taxes have always squarely landed with the local. And so, you know, Governor Branstad talks about removing the court systems, and last year they removed the mental health levy, and these are the things the state has complete ability to do. We may be running out of things that the state, that the legislature and the governor can do to offset those increases. Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the expo, and go vote.